21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
If you've ever been on a team where you are having success at the company that you're working at and things are going really well, but you're not exactly sure why or which effort is kind of leading you to success, you might think, well, it's so good right now, we can figure it out later. And you might be right. You might be able to glide on that sort of wave for a while, but it's really important to get your analytics sorted out as soon as possible so you know exactly where you're heading. Because if there's anything wrong with it, or if there's any assumptions that you make that aren't right, you could be headed in a much different direction much faster. And so what I do is I work with companies to figure out what they think is working, what's tracking, make sure the tracking is dialed in, and then from there, figuring out which of these channels are really driving the activity that is creating that big lift that's carrying you forward. My name is Joshua Lauer. I run a company called Lauer Creations. It's a consulting business specializing in marketing intelligence. What we do is we get your marketing data all sorted out, all cleaned up, all at your fingertips, so you don't have to log into 5 or 6 different things to find out what's going on. It's all right there. All the data is formatted because they're custom dashboards to the things you need to know on the day-to-day to make your decisions. And we get you up and running with empowerment. You know, when you have that data to make the decision, when you have that knowledge, you can make decisions that allow you to feel confident in what you're doing and not waking up in the middle of the night wondering, should I have shifted this budget the other way? A lot of what I see with various sites, you know, is that somebody installed Google Analytics and they don't necessarily know a ton about it. They just installed the basic tracking snippet and they say, oh, we've got Google Analytics installed. Let's go look and see if XYZ thing is happening in there. What a lot of those people don't realize is that the XYZ thing that you're wondering about, whether it's a form submission or somebody made a purchase or they signed up for your newsletter, that thing doesn't come with tracking out of the box in Google Analytics. There are some things that do track automatically. So page views, you know, what page are you looking at? If you have a site search functionality, that usually tracks pretty well. There's also exit tracking. So did they leave the site? And there's a scroll tracking event that'll say these people made it 90% of the way down the page. But if you want to know really specific things, you're going to need a custom tracking solution. And so with GA4, the thing that's sort of new and neat, although I say new, it's been around for 5 or 6 years now, but different than the older version of Google Analytics is that everything is an event. And with those events, you can send multiple sort of key value pairs with additional information as you're tracking various things. So you might think on an e-commerce site, as an example, that if somebody viewed a product page, okay, we're good. We know the name of the product. That's great. But if you're wondering why maybe they didn't add that product to the cart, it might also be interesting to collect, say, for example, have you collected any reviews yet for that product? If there's no reviews, that might explain why there's less people adding to cart. If you have collected reviews, you might want to be capturing what was the aggregate review rating at the moment that that person viewed the product. If that product for some reason had a flurry of negative reviews come in, the rating could dip. It might sway someone away from buying it. Being able to capture that event at the moment that the user sees it is a crucial kind of activity that people don't typically think about when they think about a tracking setup. But it's those kinds of extras where you say, we have the ability to track this event, but what else would we want to know about that event in any scenario? And I tend to use the sort of, there's an old book that I probably read when I was a kid called If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. and it's gonna want a glass of milk, and then the book goes on from there, and it keeps wanting more and more things. And this is kind of how the data stuff works. As soon as you answer one question, then you kind of start thinking about it differently, and a new question emerges, and you say, well, that's great, but how does that happen on mobile or desktop? Or how is that happening when they come from this channel or this ad or this website? And so on and so forth. So as soon as you start collecting the data and having confidence in sort of the basics, like the conversions are tracking, then it opens up a whole new world of like, what else can we track on this? And how can we learn as much as possible from it? I think another sort of nuance to all of that is that the data itself that you track can tell you exactly what happened and to various degrees, as we kind of just went into, but it doesn't always tell you why. So you've got to bring your business knowledge to the data when you're looking at it, and there's ways that we can talk about, how to do that. But that's kind of an interesting one. Quite often I've had, oh, this activity happened, what's going on? And usually it's comes down to I might not actually know exactly what's going on. I can confirm this is legit data. And then in talking to the business owners, I find out, oh, there was a promotion that they maybe didn't remember to tell me about, or maybe it wasn't tracked properly. So now we see a bunch of like direct traffic coming through for an event that was set up, maybe got set up months ago and they just forgot about it or something like that. But like those kinds of things are going to illuminate all sorts of questions. So the context is really important. Understand the business, understand your customers. All of that stuff matters when you're analyzing this data. I think it was probably, gosh, maybe 9 years ago, nine, maybe 8 years ago, somewhere around there. I was relatively new at Lead Pages, and there's a group of people running some campaigns, and they approached me after the campaigns had already been running, and they're like, "Hey, we spent 50K on these ads that were just running last month, and we're trying to figure out how they performed." And it's the first time I'm hearing about it. And so I start digging in, asking questions, and what I find out is that these ads were set up with no UTM link tracking on them. So basically, the people that came to the site from the ads just appeared to come directly to the site. There was nothing saying they came from these ads. So here we have this money we spent, and now we're like, oh boy, how are we going to show any value for this? So it was a thing where we're able to look at the direct traffic and kind of see a spike there and get sort of a proxy, which if you think about marketing like before the internet, when it was just billboards on the side of the street, you would kind of have similar math going on, right? You know that the street gets roughly this many sort of cars going by, and so you've got roughly this many eyes on it. You're able to see this kind of difference in the activity that definitely came from that ad spend. But certainly the colleagues in question there never forgot to put the UTMs on an ad again after that. And so that was kind of an interesting one. Like there's definitely a very big like whoops kind of moment there with those people, and probably concern about are they going to lose their jobs? But I think in that example, yes, an expensive mistake to an extent, but the only mistake was that we missed the tracking. The marketing itself was still dialed in to do what it was supposed to do. So it's not like we just threw money down the drain, so to speak. The campaigns were still running. It's just our ability to tie it back directly to success was compromised a little bit. A different example of an account I had, they had previously come up with a lifetime value calculation. It was a company that offered like a, software as a service type thing where you'd pay X amount of money, get access to the whole library of educational content. And, kind of the main thing was like, you're going to keep your subscription going, right? And so they had previously worked with some other folks who kind of made some calculations for lifetime value that significantly reduced the expected um, lifetime value, and it caused them to make decisions to actually reduce the price of the monthly service in order to try to get probably in more of a range that they felt people could afford at the time. But then it had the side effect of like the amount you're spending on the ads was now kind of a lot more expensive versus what you were getting. And so it was like now that you've offered these lower prices, how do you kind of say, whoops, we need to go back to this other price? And so that was kind of a challenging situation where there were some decisions around kind of do we raise the price? Do we raise it for people that got the old price? Do we raise it only for new customers? And it's one of those things where it's not a good situation to be in when you've made a miscalculation and you've kind of run with it for a number of months. And by the time I was involved, it's more of like oh, this trajectory is already happening here. So the advice there was we do need to sort of reset, reprice this back to a level that's more sustainable based off of various calculations we're doing. But then we have to sort of weather the storm because there's going to be 2 to 3 months where people are like, I saw this ad very recently that was this lower price. What happened here? And so, that's where kind of uh, this kind of is interesting. You get into the intangibles, right? Like the brand sort of ends up mattering a little bit more than the data here because it's that reputation, it's that relationship that customers have with the brand. And if people start to feel like, if you think about like a person that's sort of pulled a fast one on you, like you don't like that, right? So you don't like the feeling that you get from a brand that's maybe raising a price when you felt like you had a different deal locked in. And so, there's ways to do it. I mean, all the streaming platforms in the world now are raising their prices pretty regularly because I think they all raced for like lower prices to get the folks, and now they're kind of facing the reality that like their costs and their expenses necessitate that they have to raise their rates. And so, how do you do that? And Netflix and some of the bigger ones are sending out emails. They're trying to it's not like it's $5 extra per month. It's usually like $1 something. They're trying to reduce the amount, and they're trying to explain why. And there's this big commitment to like the brand and what the brand set out to do. And so those kinds of things, like again, kind of speaking to that, like the data versus like the why, the what, and the business, right? So like you need to know what's right for your business, for your customer, and you need to stay true to that brand voice. If you look like you're just sort of chasing a quick buck here and there, left and right, people are going to start to see through that, and they're not going to want to renew as much. When it comes to kind of evaluating the data that you have and kind of bringing your brand and your audience along, there are various things that you can do to sort of dial that in, right? So like on the one hand, we've got your website and the data and analytics that come from all that, right? And that's going to be, we already got them there. They've already thought about it. They made it to the site. Now we're trying to get them to either fill out the form or complete the purchase. But prior to that, there's probably going to be a variety of different things you're doing on various social networks, and just sort of being out there in the zeitgeist of the topic that your business is in. And within that, there are things we can measure in all of those scenarios along the lines of like, how are people interacting with the brand, right? So if you're posting, your posts could get likes, you could have comments on them, they could be reshared, but then capturing that data in a more methodical way where you can get, applause rate, so how many likes per post, and amplification rate would be like how many times do they share, and conversation rate being how often does someone comment. And you can imagine if we just take those things, which are just ways to kind of turn the typical social activities into, more of a metric, each of those things is going to have something slightly different going on with it, right? If you are posting and the desire is to get more people to comment, you're going to post a lot differently than if you just want someone to reshare or if you just want a bunch of likes, right? You're going to have some kind of call to action to be like, tell us what you think in the comments or something like that. And so those things are, you know, you're going to customize them to your brand and to your brand message and to all the things that your business is doing. But in measuring those alongside all the other metrics, you start to create a way where you track kind of that brand uh, almost as an entity, and how is that entity being interacted with out there in the world, and how does, if you think about like some of the bigger brands, like I think Legos, for example, right? Like they've got all the toys, the movies, the video games, and you can also, people can submit like ideas for Legos now, and if they get enough upvotes, Lego will just make the thing that the person, people submitted, because they know that people are going to buy them. So like and they were a brand that I think was struggling, kind of turn of the century, and so that's an interesting kind of letting your customers into the, like, here's what we're going to produce part of it, like not exactly the kind of uh, idea that would probably pop out like as the number one first thing you think that a company would do, but pretty interestingly and sort of insightful in terms of like, if you think about the market research you do when you launch a new product, here you've got a bunch of people upvoting various things. So you have it like right in front of you. These are the people that want to buy it. You probably have a rough idea of, okay, some of these people say they're going to buy it, but they're maybe just excited, so you know it's going to be X percent of those roughly. And I'm sure they've got the numbers pretty dialed in over the years. So they know they can just print these toys, and basically it's like printing money because it's a sure thing, versus maybe somebody has an idea that we should make a more obscure, to use the Lego thing again, a Lego house that's a advanced, more expensive product. Uh, Maybe that's not as interesting as the things that people are voting on in that respect. If you think about any good relationships, like there's give and take, right? Push and pull. And like when people feel that with brands that they love, it establishes a stronger relationship than just like, oh, this is just a brand that's constantly like, you know, they commented on my social post that mentioned them, but like the comment was just like, click here to like get 10% off or something. It just feels like they're trying to sell, like versus like being more genuine. Like you don't always have to be in sell mode. If you're at a point where you're wondering about a data warehouse, and maybe you've heard some talk about it, or you know that your company has one, but maybe they don't have one for the marketing team, and you're like, is that for me? The good news is if you're using Google Analytics 4, GA4, there's a one-click button that will allow you to send all that data to BigQuery. And you're like, well, okay, but I have it in GA4. Why do I need to go to BigQuery where I have to write queries? The reason that I would say is that when Google announced the switch to GA4, they told everyone that had the previous version of Google Analytics, like, hey, this will continue to collect data for one more year. After that, it'll stop. And then 1 year after that, all the data that you collected in this account over the lifetime of the account will be gone. And so we learn a lesson from Google. Like, if we don't own our data, we don't own our data. You might think the past is the past, but when it comes to your business, looking back, understanding things that you've done historically and how they performed can very much help you on the path forward when you're considering whether or not you want to do this promotion or try this new thing with the business. So having that historical data is very, very important. But once we get that GA4 data into BigQuery, there's other tools that we can use to get your spend, whether it's LinkedIn ads, TikTok ads, Meta ads, Google ads, Pinterest, whatever, you name it, into that same data warehouse. And then if you've got, like, depending on your business systems, basically the idea is anything where there's like a sort of digital customer touch point, we want to get that data into the data warehouse because then we can write queries that join things up all the way across the entire business. And you're like, well, like, why does it matter if it's all the way across the entire business? Well, let's say you're looking at your website and you're like, hey, I've got a conversion rate of people that are signing up for the newsletter, and I would like that conversion rate to be higher because I feel like that would mean more people in the newsletter. So I think what I want to do is put like a big thing on my site that has like a Wheel of Fortune thing that you'll spin, and you might be able to win like a discount or something. So that's the incentive to spin the thing and then enter your email so you can get the discount that you won. And that sounds great. And you start doing this, and your email takes off, right? And so now you've got a huge email list. And if that's the only place that you're looking at, you're like, this is great. Success is mine. But let's follow that to the email now. So now we're sending email. We're sending more email than we've ever sent before because we got a much larger list. But the thing is, we were so pushy on the website about getting people to sign up for that newsletter that it was kind of like the default like action that they could take. They didn't really have an option to do anything else. And so you get people on the newsletter potentially before they're ready to be on that newsletter. And that's happening much more than it was happening before now, right? So now you're sending email, but your open rates are not as good as they used to be. And because your open rates aren't as good as they used to be, now that's putting you into the promotions tab on Gmail, or you might even be making it a spam folder because people are like, I don't know, I signed up for this. I don't know why I signed up for it. And they're not opening it. And if people aren't engaging with your emails, that sends a signal to all the email clients that like this is more promotional. It's not important enough to make it into your inbox, right? So now you've got a different problem that you have to solve. And on the email side, you've started filtering down to be like, let's only send this to people that opened within the last 30 days. And maybe they clicked on an email because you want that quality signal to go back so that you end up in the inbox. So now we've got this weird sort of like the website's inflating the email list, and then in the email list we're paring it down, and the funnel is like getting bigger and smaller all along the way. And then in the meantime, like we haven't even asked like how is this new group doing at actually like accomplishing the business goals yet. You can kind of see how like these things are all interconnected and interrelated, and it's really important to see from start to finish what that path is, and to think about that as like a customer journey, but like not just a customer journey. And I think the reason I want to distinguish customer journey is that some people will sort of imagine like if you imagine like say you take a walk every day, right? Like you leave your house, you go down the street 2 blocks, you take a right. You've got this route that you take, right? Maybe you take the same route every day, or maybe you decide to mix it up every day. But if you ask 1,000 people what kind of a route they take on a daily walk, just as an example, they're all going to take a totally different walk because of where they live and all kinds of other things, right? So if you look at your website and you've got like a navigation on the top and you can get to the contact page from this, navigation, you might have a button here. There's basically an infinite number of ways that somebody can accomplish any kind of activity on your site, and then forget about your site. Now they're off like researching like, hey, does anyone use this product that you're selling? And they're trying to see what the rest of the world thinks about it. So all this stuff is happening sometimes in places you can track and sometimes not. And so if you start to kind of map out all of the paths, you can end up in this place where like it's sort of this infinite level of overwhelm, right? So like what you really want to do is identify like kind of the main path, and maybe even in this world that we live in today, there's so much data that personalization really kind of like took off. But once you've kind of tried to analyze that level of data, it's easy to see how personalization is really like it's sort of the opposite of the majority, right? It's the opposite of like statistics in a way. One data point is not a statistical analysis. So the more that you try to make like a personalized message based off of this exact scenario that you think someone's going to go down, the more that you probably potentially losing all kinds of other people that you weren't accounting for because you were like sort of narrow focused on this one example, right? So like being able to make sure that your concept is open to a wider audience is really important. And so, one example of how could you personalize more effectively is to go back in time to when personas were more popular because the data wasn't as prevalent. And if you identify 3 to 5 personas and kind of create these imaginary people and try to serve them, you're going to find that you're doing a better job at creating content that resonates with a wider group of your audience than just the scenario that you imagined, which is going to maybe speak to people in your audience that are really similar to you, but it's not going to speak to the wider audience on the way that you want it to, typically speaking. Sometimes people get lucky and they get it right, but most of the time we need these sort of guardrails in place to make sure that we do actually get it right. Okay, so we've been talking, a bit about, the data, kind of some of the sort of intangible things, as it relates to how the customers relate to your brand. We've kind of painted a picture about how there could be different, like more customized pieces of data that you'd want to collect specific to your business. Try to create some examples of that. I've also shared with you scenarios where things can go wrong and people can accidentally spend money in ways that they didn't necessarily plan on or hope to be able to track more effectively. And if you've ever been kind of like, oh, maybe I can sort of fumble my way around this and figure it out on my own, or if you've ever had a person on the team that was kind of doing that and maybe they're not with the company anymore and now nobody really knows what's going on with your analytics, that's a scenario where you probably need to talk to someone like myself to get your data, sorted out, to make sure that you have confidence in it. Nobody wants to be wondering if the boat that they're floating in is going to sink, right? So like, let's make sure that you've got a boat that's ready to take you where you want to go. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Joshua Lauer. There's a photo of myself probably about 15 years ago at a friend's wedding, and just reach out, send me a message, mention the podcast, tell me you're interested in doing a deep dive audit, and I'll get back to you with the time that we can talk about your business, all the things that you're looking to track, all the concerns you have, and make sure you don't have those concerns anymore.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Imagine a space where triumphs, trials, and tales of entrepreneurship come alive. Welcome to the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Podcast, a gold awarded journey hosted by Martin Piskarik, connecting with listeners in 95 countries and ranking in the top 0.5% of all podcasts. Join our exclusive community, elevate your perspective, and embark on the path to success.